Every mission is a life or death scenario.
You're a U-2 pilot, and a U-2 pilot is not the kind of flying job that many people have. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what a U-2 pilot is, how you get there, and what makes it so unique, and one of the few really unique jobs that are out there?
Yeah, it's there's very, very few of us. You know, the airplane, the U-2 Dragon Lady, made by Lockheed Martin, started 1955. There's still just over 1,000 pilots who have ever flown it, so it really is a community of the few.
Robert Haines, do you observe that business owners in a peer group naturally, oh, let me tell you about all the stuff I'm not doing great as a leader at the moment, and yeah, I've got problems in my business? I mean, my experience is quite the opposite. Like to break through that, what have you experienced?
Yes, there's a lot of ego, there's a lot of pride, there's a lack of transparency.
Hey guys, and welcome to this episode of The Few. Before we get started, I'm going to ask you for a favor. If you've listened to the podcast before and you feel like it's made an impact, or you've gained some insight that's helped you have a better day, that's helped you accelerate you to your destination to achieve your goals, whether your life journey's become a little bit easier thanks to the show, I just want you to subscribe quickly below. You can click now while you're listening to this. Even better is share the show. Tag The Few podcast on TikTok, Reels, Insta, you name it. Put it on LinkedIn. Let's help people achieve their dreams and organizations achieve the strategies, the destinations, the audacious goals that are going to make this world a better place. Thanks so much for all your support. Let's click subscribe and get on with the show. Today's guest is somebody who is familiar with the aviation environment. In fact, comes from it from a very unique perspective. So I think we might spend a bit of time today talking about how to look at life and business from a different perspective, but transition that experience as a United States Air Force pilot into business. So with no further ado, hey, Robert Haines, thanks so much for joining me today on The Few. I feel very honored to have you here, and it's just after Veterans Day. Thank you for your service, sir.
Well, thank you, Boo. I really appreciate the invitation to be here, and excited to talk with you and just kind of share my journey.
So, Rob, you've flown airplanes that fly very high, don't you? And have a pretty cool name, the Dragon Lady. I know you've had an extensive Air Force career, but let's start there, because you're a U-2 pilot, and a U-2 pilot is not the kind of flying job that many people have. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what a U-2 pilot is, how you get there, and what makes it so unique, and one of the few really unique jobs that are out there?
Yeah, it's there's very, very few of us. You know, the airplane, the U-2 Dragon Lady, made by Lockheed Martin, started 1955. There's still just over 1,000 pilots who have ever flown it, so it really is a community of the few. Very difficult airplane to fly, but very special mission. For those that aren't familiar with it, it's a high altitude reconnaissance platform. Continues to operate globally around the world. The U-2s that we're flying today are much different than the ones in the early 50s, late 60s. These are cutting edge, leading edge technology, amazing collection platforms that do great service to our nation and international community. To fly the airplane, how do you get there? I mean, I think, your little intro is about having a vision, having a goal. When I was a kid growing up in Austin, Texas, Boo, I had a picture of a U-2 on my wall. I was just mesmerized by this airplane. It just looked so differently than anything else. And at the time, there was a movie that came out with Lee Majors that he was portraying Francis Gary Powers, who was shot down over the Soviet Union. Many people know that story. But I was mesmerized by this airplane, and I went to the United States Air Force Academy, very blessed to be able to go there, and then NATO Joint Jet pilot training and fly a number of things. But on one of my missions, flying out of Washington, D.C., down to Patrick Air Force Base in Florida, I was actually flying VIP airlift at the time. I happened to peek inside a hangar, and I saw a U-2 in person for the very first time, and it was inside this hangar, all geeked out with all this special equipment and antennae and different instruments and sensors, and it was protected by a cordon and several security guards. And Boo, I was mesmerized, right? This was the coolest flying machine I had physically ever seen.
It comes with an aura, doesn't it? Like it because people don't realize it's not just an airplane. It's a mission system, and the system that it integrates in is really an enormous strategic resource for a nation. So part of that, really, as you said, it's the security. It's you know that when it's what it does has a real genuine purpose to it, right?
It does. Yeah, a very unique purpose. And like you said, it is a mission system. Although it is piloted by a single pilot, it is connected electronically and digitally with a network of people around the world, physically around the world, that are collecting, processing, transmitting information. And so, although I was physically flying it, I was linked up with 100 different people federated in different sites around the world, accomplishing the mission with me. And so it was a fascinating network to be in. But after I saw this plane in Florida, I flew back to my commanding officer that evening and I walked into his office. It was like, I want to go do that. How do I go do that? Right. And we didn't know. We didn't know, how do you get into this community? And he saw the passion in my eyes. And we was like, okay, let's figure this out. So thankfully, I had a very good commander mentor who started making phone calls, and we started doing the discovery process of, hey, how do I do this? Unfortunately, at the time, I didn't have enough hours. I didn't have enough experience to even apply for the program. And so we charted a course for me, like any good mentor does. It's like, okay, in order to do that, this is what you need to go do. And I did it, right? I went to another weapon system. I accumulated enough hours. I became a major weapon system instructor. I started rushing the fraternity, so to speak. This is a very close knit community, the U2 community. And so I just started to visit them and started them to get to know me. And so when I had enough hours to apply, I put in my application and thankfully was accepted to go interview. The interview process, people don't know, is 2 weeks long. It is a very extensive interview.
But before that, Robert, how many years had you invested without a direct return and without a guarantee, but you committed to a process? Like how long was that between? I mean, I guess it was from the moment you had that poster on your wall as a child.
Yeah, I mean, I had the vision in my mind, a poster on the wall, because I was familiar with the plane, and I was like, that looks like something really special, right? From the time I physically saw it until I was qualified or had the qualifications to make the application was 5 years, right? So for 5 years, I lived, breathed every single day on, this is what I want to do. I want to do something today that's going to get me closer to that, right? So what am I doing today that's going to get me closer to that goal? And I was very, very committed.
And you're doing a lot of extras, right? You're making the time to go and visit. You're doing all of this extra activity that is above and beyond what the expectation is. I remember when I wanted to be a fighter pilot. From the age of 13, I was visiting fighter squadrons back when you could, and and by the time I joined, I was on a first name basis with a lot of these folks, right? And I knew them by name. And like hearing your story is one of the yeah, I haven't heard it for a long time where demonstrating that commitment and how just seeing something, not even touching it or just seeing something, can invoke that visceral response and connect your day-to-day action with that sense of purpose. So sorry for interrupting, but I just think people forget that. Like people forget the when the big thing happens to you in life, just the amount of work and commitment with zero return that you have to put in prior to that moment.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the introduction or the interruption, because I think that's really important point is it's more than just meeting the qualifications to submit an application. I needed this many hours. I needed to be an instructor. I need to have the certain level of experience. But I also understood, Boo, that this community received many, many, many more applications than they had spots applicants. So I was trying to differentiate myself from any other applicant. And so I knew that if they knew me, when they saw my application finally come across the desk, they'd be like, "Oh, Robert is ready, right? We know him. We're ready to give his application the proper consideration." And so,
We've been waiting for this. We've been waiting for this moment.
yeah, exactly, and that's what it was. Is they kept talking to me. It's like, okay, when are you going to submit it? When can you submit it? And so when I submitted it, yes, they were looking for it, and so I think that made all the difference. Not in an annoying way, but I just made myself familiar enough with them that they knew who I was. Right?
In a committed way. You're committed to it.
Yeah, oh yeah, and they knew that. They knew I was committed to it, and I think that also helped when, I from a technical standpoint, maybe I wasn't the most qualified candidate, but I knew from a passion and commitment standpoint, I was absolutely the number one candidate in my mind, right? And I think that's what they saw.
And just so people know, what is it that's so unique about this airplane? I mean, you're the closest thing to an astronaut that the Air Force has, right?
Yeah, it is a very difficult airplane to fly. And we fly in a pressure suit, right? An astronaut pressure suit. And so it is very cumbersome, very claustrophobic inside this very enclosed canopy in this heavy pressure suit. And so the physical environment is very, very difficult. And the airplane, for those not familiar, it's a 104-foot wingspan. It's on bicycle gear. So there's a gear up front and a gear in the back, a tail wheel. It's a tail wheel airplane. There are outriggers on the wings that are holding the wings level after we do an engine start and taxi out. But when we start our takeoff roll and the wings start generating lift, the pogos, we call them the pogos, fall off. And now you're balancing from even the initial takeoff sequence, you're balancing a 104-foot wingspan going down the runway until it generates enough lift to lift off. But then it climbs like a homesick angel. I mean, it just soars rapidly up through 50, 60,000 feet.
You've basically got a glider with a fighter engine.
It's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, it is a glider. And thankfully, when I was at the Air Force Academy, I was a glider instructor. So I knew that what that felt like, a very, very long, high aspect wing, very, very difficult to control.
And fighter jets have swept wings and they're pointy because you're not going to have a problem if you go too fast, right? But when your wing is a big surfboard and you go too fast, you have a problem, right? So you got a lot of, yeah. And this is the U2's challenges between you going too fast when you're down low, but equally trying to keep the thing between stalling or exceeding limits at the very edge of the atmosphere. Yeah.
Yeah, at our mission altitude, so above 70,000 feet, we fly a Mach profile. And so there is an autopilot that intercepts a Mach. And then as we burn down gas and become lighter, the plane continues to climb the entire sortie. Um, and as we climb, the window between an overspeed and a stall becomes down to less than 10 knots. And so we're constantly trying to balance not overspeeding the airplane, but not stalling the airplane. And oftentimes, if you hit a little, temperature inversion up at altitude, the plane will hiccup a little bit and go right into a stall buffet. And so it requires a immense awareness of what is going on during the mission and an understanding of how to fly. And the best advice, we'll get to the landing in a second, but the best advice when I was learning how to fly the U2 from my instructor was to forget everything I knew about flying an airplane and just listen to what he told me, right? Because it does not fly like any other machine out there. And that is very demonstrated during the landing portion. It does land on those bicycle gear, and so there are no landing gear out on the wings. And so when we come in for a land, we have to stall it to land it because once we get into ground effect, so when the wing creates a cushion of air between the wing surface and the ground, the plane does not want to land. It will just float down the entire runway on that cushion of air, even if the throttle is all the way back to idle. And so you have to physically stall the airplane to get it to come down.
Which is what you're taught not to do as a pilot, right? That is like
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to do that. Yeah. Yeah. And so once again, forget everything you learned about flying. Just listen to how to fly to U2. But the process we would use is to try to cross the threshold of the runway at 10 feet. There is another pilot in a car driving behind us that is giving us altitude calls or height above the runway. And the reason for that is with the spacesuit helmet on and some of the sensors that we carry, we cannot see the runway when we're in the landing attitude. And so we need an audio cues from a pilot saying, "Hey, you're at 10 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet, 4 feet." We try to get down to 2 feet and just hold it off until the airplane will stall on its tail, and then gently, we hope, the forward gear will touch down. But still, the ride is not over because we're balancing this 104-foot wingspan going down the runway, trying to get it to come to a complete stop. And then we will let a wingtip like gently ease down to the surface of the runway. There are titanium skids on each of the wingtips, but it is a crazy. It's like trying to fly a leaf down to the ground, um, and it's a crazy thing to fly.
I'm really keen to explore, some of the analogies for business, right? Uh, because I think there's patterns of behavior that we learn, and those patterns of behavior can be applied to any of life's challenges or problems, right? Um, so when you're flying, within 10 knots, and for people that aren't familiar with that, that's 12 miles per hour, 13 miles per hour in a very fast piece of machinery, and you make a mistake. You're when you stall, the airplane falls out of the sky. When you overspeed, the wings rip off. You fall out of the sky. So the both of those outcomes are suboptimal. What do you learn about focus and attention and the relationship between technology, automation, and you're up there for a long time? I mean, how do you not, let's take it to the worst case scenario. How do you not fall asleep, and how do you stay stimulated where the consequences are so profound?
Yeah. First of all, I think each of us realize we're being pushed to our physical limitations when we are flying that airplane, right? And that's something we just get very, very comfortable with. That every mission is a life or death scenario if we do not perform to the maximum of our physical and mental abilities on that day, right? So right there, you have my attention, right? And so I think just knowing that and having that self-awareness of, hey, in this moment I'm completely present. What I'm doing, I'm prioritizing my task, and I know, and I'm 100% concentrated on exactly how am I performing as a pilot, and how is the machine performing as an aero vehicle, and then how is the mission going, because most of the time we're connected to a network of people. And so it typically doesn't get boring, because we are trying to accomplish a mission. And so, there is an interaction there in many circumstances. Sometimes we would be off, what we would call off tether, where we're not connected digitally to someone else, and we're just going off and doing a mission by ourselves, and we're not talking to anyone for up to 12 hours. And so those missions, we really have to stay focused. But that is a skill that is learned, Boo, is how to stay present in the moment and focus on the priorities at hand, right? And not allow our minds to drift off and be distracted by things that can honestly kill us, right? Um, I think, in my work with business owners, what I do now is I coach and then strategically advise business owners. It's a lot of the same skills, right? It is, hey, be present in the moment. What's most important in your business and in your life at this very moment. Not be too concerned about what has happened previously, because there's nothing we can do about it. Let's garner the lessons and the wisdoms learned that we can from the past experience, and then let's forecast what's going to happen in the future. But we can't get too anxious about things we can't control. So let's do what we can today in this moment to maximize the benefit to us and our business.
When it comes to perspective, I mean, just talk us through how high this airplane flies, and the consequences for a human, and why we wear a pressure suit. Like, what happens to you at that altitude if things go wrong?
Yeah. So above 70,000 feet, it continues to climb above that altitude as it burns down gas, it gets lighter. We have to wear a pressure suit, because although the U2 is pressurized, when I was flying the airplane, we would be sitting about, the cabin altitude would be about 25,000 feet, which is extremely high, right? Which is incredibly physiologically exhausting, right? To be able to sit at 25,000 feet for hours and hours at a time. It's just the biology of your body just doesn't like that kind of altitude.
I mean, that's Everest, right? That's when people they're getting altitude sickness. They're dying. That's the sort of height we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, that's the kind of height we're talking about. And we would sit there for, 12, 13, 14 hours at a time. Um, but if we lost pressurization, so if something malfunctioned on the airplane and we lost cabin pressure inside of our little capsule, it would go skyrocket to above 70,000 feet. And at 52,000 feet, the nitrogen escapes from your blood and you physically boil. I mean, it is your blood will boil. And so that is why we're wearing a pressure suit, in case of that potentiality of losing pressure, having a malfunction. And if we did that, the suit would inflate instantly, and it would protect our body from dying.
That's crazy. And I presume in its almost 60, 70-year history that a lot of what you've learned in the lessons are based on incidents or accidents, right?
Yeah, of course. Like aviation in general, we learn from unfortunate circumstances and instances. It's like, okay, how do we not let that happen again? Right. So,
So, question on that though. Question on that, right? Like, one of the things I've certainly noticed about business is an avoidance of things going wrong, or not wanting to l- be honest about a product that might be on its way to being obsolete, and people potentially just grinding it away without lessons from the past. I mean, how important was it for you in that community to be able to learn lessons in the near past, but also create a culture where you remembered the bigger incidents and the the icebergs to avoid? What was different in the U2 community that business could take out and learn and deliver real value?
yeah, a couple things. I mean, this as being an aviator, right? There's tremendous amount of preparation and pre-brief and mission planning, right? Where, especially for high value missions, where a lot of things can go wrong. Um, there's a tremendous amount of planning, team planning about what are all the different consequences and what are actions that what are we going to do if this happens? What are we going to do if this happens? What are we going to do if this happens? So there's a lot of pre-planning and pre-thought, which I think a lot of people in the business community don't plan very well, right? They don't really strategically plan for a lot of different things that could potentially go wrong or go right, and how do they mitigate the failures, or how do they leverage the successes, right? There's just not a lot of that pre-planning. The other thing that we know from our aviation background is, yeah, we're technically good aviators, boo, but it's the debriefs, right, where we learn the lessons that we want to instill inside of us. And it always amazed a lot of my friends when I would say I would go fly. If it's a training mission, I might go fly for 2 hours, and I might spend 6 hours dissecting that briefing, the dissecting the mission and every single component of the mission in a 6 hour debrief for a 2 hour mission. And they were just blown away by that. And I think we would look at, how did we do the mission planning? How did we do the aircraft pre-flight? How did we do the radio calls? What could we have done better? What were we thinking in this situation? What were we thinking in this situation? What else could we have done? If we had done that, what do we think the result would have been? And so I think we are accustomed now to that level of self critique, and being open to the critique of others and open to the advice and perspectives of others, because we learn so much in our aviation community from other pilots, right? I learned more in the bar, we call it the heritage room, right? But I learned more in the bar about how to be a good aviator and how to be a good U2 mission pilot than, or as much in there that I did in the airplane, right? It's just talking and learning from others. And I think that's what a lot of business owners could benefit from, is learning from other business owners and really having an environment where they do look back and they think about, in that decision, what was I thinking? What could I have done differently? What would that potential result be? Um, when I would made this decision and I thought the outcome was going to be this, did I achieve that outcome that I anticipated, or was it something different, or why was it different, right? And so I don't think there's that self-reflection often enough in the business community, especially the small business community, where the owners are really just trying to keep their business open often.
But don't you think that's a function of a lack of debriefing? I mean, I often hear organizations say, "Hey, we're just too busy to debrief," and my thought is, well, you're too busy because you're not debriefing. That's the problem, right?
Yeah, exactly right. It is. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they know that yeah, they know. I think all business owners know that there are improvements that they can make. They just don't feel like they have time to make them, because they don't give themselves time, without the knowledge of, if I just force myself to make the time to learn how to do things better, I will create so much more time to do things differently, right? And better and improve. And so I think there's a lot of parallels that we can learn from our aviation background, that just became natural to us. But when I jumped into the business world and the business consulting world, I just realized, oh, people don't do this, right? But we can see the benefits of what we learned, to be able to help them do things better.
So tell us a little bit about how you apply that within the framework of TAB. Maybe just share the value of something like TAB and how what you've learned in the past. I'm going to get on some deep humanitarian questions soon with the altitude perspective, but let's save that for the end. But right now, like within the peer network that you operate in today, what do you see as the value of that and mapped across to how we had that same peer group accountability and support in the Air Force?
Yeah. So TAB is called the Alternative Board, right? And we recognize the fact that big businesses have a board of directors for a reason, right? And this goes even all the way back to Napoleon Hill and this concept of a mastermind group. It's really trying to put leaders around the table with other leaders to be able to leverage the experience and wisdom of others in order to harness wisdom and make better decisions, right? Ultimately, in a corporation, a CEO is accountable for the decisions, but those decisions are not made in a vacuum, right? They're made by discussion and wisdom with other wise people. Small business owners typically don't have the benefit of sitting around the table with other business owners to explore challenges and opportunities and harness the wisdom of others. And so that is what the alternative board does is we create an alternative board of directors for small business owners where we will build boards of directors for business owners to meet every single month, and every person on there is a tab member, and they're serving as a board of directors for each other, and each of them come with an issue to discuss at a monthly board meeting about the greatest challenge or the greatest opportunity going on in their business at that time, right? And I facilitate the conversations. But once a business owner presents an issue, hey, this is what's going on. This is some background information. This is the result I'm looking for. This is what I'm thinking about trying, or I've tried already. This is what help I need from you. The most powerful next step is we ask each other very, very hard questions, right? Is because it's the power of the questions from peer business owners that forces us to think differently, right?
But let's unpack that for a minute, mate, because that's all great in terms of intention and conceptually. But do you observe that business owners in a peer group naturally, oh, let me tell you about all the stuff I'm not doing great as a leader at the moment, and yeah, I've got problems in my business. I mean, my experience is quite the opposite. Like to 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 break through that. What have you experienced?
Yes, there's a lot of ego. There's a lot of pride. There's a lack of transparency. But after, I would say it takes about 4 to 6 months in my experience of a board being together where they realize they will benefit from this confidential group because we're all in this pocket of confidentiality. Whatever happens in the room stays in the room. That they realize that they will benefit if they put their cards on the table and really open their mind and open their heart and say, this is what's going on, right? Because when we create that space, Boo, it is the only space for many business owners where they can come in and say, I have no idea what I'm doing, right? Or I'm losing money, or I can't fix this problem. They have no other place to say that where they know they're not going to get judged, right? But they also are communicating that to a group of people who completely 100% understand exactly how they feel and what they're saying, right? And they're only in that same room together because they're 100% committed to help each other. Once they realize that, right, that this is a group, it's almost like a crew on an airplane, right? Once you form that crew, they are really there to support each other for mission success, and that's the same way with one of our peer boards. And so it takes a little bit of time to build that trust and authenticity, but once we have it, it is an incredibly powerful place to be.
There's again a nuance there in you're talking about maybe at the start of this journey, maybe people are looking to join these peer groups for what they can get out of it, but quickly realize it's being in service to everyone else, both in terms of your humility and intention to help others grow that almost by accident, that's what happens to you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it also happens to, that's one reason why I focus so much on the questions, because when I ask business owners to ask each other questions that no one else is going to ask, right? The really hard questions, it forces us to think really critically, right? Because it's easy to ask softball questions, but if if I know as I'm working around the table that, oh, I need to ask Boo, a really challenging question, and I really draw that from my intuition, and I really kind of um, try to figure out what a question am I going to ask that's really going to challenge your thinking or another business owner's thinking. It helps us be more critical in our own thinking, right? And so not only does it help the other person think, how am I going to respond to this question? Because no one ever has asked that before. And it's through those questions and through that curiosity is we learn to think differently. And if we think differently, we act differently. If we act differently, we will achieve a different result. Um, it's amazing, like kids, children ask so many questions. Why this? Why does that happen? Why is this? Right? And it's that natural curiosity that somehow, in middle school and high school, we lose that, right? When you talk to high school educators, every kid in class is sitting there. They don't want to ask any questions. Oftentimes, because with our kids, we're like, don't ask me, don't ask, stop asking questions, right? We diminish that curiosity sometimes,
Or we're afraid of looking stupid, right?
or afraid of looking stupid. Yeah, yeah.
If I have to ask this question in math class, why isn't anyone else asking the question? Everyone else must know it. Everyone else must know how to run a business. It's just me who's the idiot that doesn't, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we try to bring that curiosity back out, where there is no stupid question. Just whatever is really stirring inside you that you really want to know, ask that question, and we go around and ask these questions of each other, and it becomes very, very powerful. But the next step, though, is where we leverage the wisdom of, okay, in this situation, if a business owner brings this challenge, we ask questions, we clarify what the issue is, we really understand the background, what result the business owner is looking for. Now we leverage the wisdom in the room and be like, okay, based on your experience, what advice do you have for this business owner, or what suggestions do you have? And that's where we get often very conflicting advice, very conflicting opinions from other business owners, right? Because every business owner's journey is different. And I try to make the room as diverse as possible. So you have someone that might be in manufacturing and professional services and retail, and some variety of businesses. And so they look at things from a completely different lens. And so we harness those different perspectives. And so it makes us really consider different viewpoints and be like, okay, based on what I've heard today, I make each of them commit to take an action, right? And we hold each other accountable. And that's the thing is, I'm going to bring an issue. I'm going to be challenged and questioned about, so they truly understand the issue before they provide any advice. I'm going to hear different forms of advice or opinions, and then I'm going to make a decision about what action I'm going to take. And I know they're going to hold me accountable. Often it goes back to just with the environment you and I used to live in, in our squadrons, with our peers, with our teammates, and me. They would hold us accountable. Are you doing are you doing everything you can do to be the best aviator you can be? Are you doing every action every day to accomplish your mission as best as you can? We would question each other, we would challenge each other, but we would commit to helping each other be as successful as possible. That's the same spirit of cooperation and commitment that we have in these peer boards.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying these episodes of The Few. If you are, if you feel like they're making an impact, you've learned something insightful, there's a little golden nugget of wisdom that you've been able to apply to your own life, let's share it with as many people as possible. The best way to do that is to leave a review. If you leave a review, we get more listeners on the show. If we have more listeners, we get bigger guests, and it's the big guests that live the big dreams where we're going to learn the most. And my job is to ask the questions that are going to help you on your own journey. So let's make this show as big as we possibly can. I'm fully committed, I'm passionate, and I'd love for you to show your support by leaving a quick review. And I think it's critical. I mean, it's so hard to keep yourself to account. We perceive that we can, and we perceive that we're bulletproof, and we tell ourselves a story, but what we believe, I think, is there's a deeper insecurity there that only a peer group can, supportive peer group. You don't want to be in a toxic or negative one, obviously. Makes all the difference. Now, what does one learn about humanity when you hang out above 70,000 feet? What does that give you in terms of your perspective on life, the planet, everyone that's on it? Did you have any moments where you just really become quite contemplative?
Oh, absolutely. There are many moments I can reflect where, the earth looks so small, right? I mean, we really do see the curvature of the earth. You do start to realize that, this is a big rock in the universe that we live on. um, and I was enormously privileged and honored to be able to have that perspective real time. you know and there are often times where we'd be flying in certain regions of the world where there's a lot of catastrophe and things going on below us. There's a lot of conflict. And we were there to try to discover what is really happening. I mean, in the intelligence world, that's all we're trying to discover is, I mean, what is the ground truth? What is really happening? What is the information we need to provide our leaders so they can make good decisions? But it does occur to me, it's like, why is all this happening? Right? I mean, you can see this great, beautiful, amazing world, and you'd be flying over, from my perspective, some of the most beautiful landscapes that just take your breath away, and see these glorious sunsets or sunrises, and wonder why does all this occurring on the ground beneath me, right? And it just makes me ask the question of, why can't we just be nice to each other?
Yeah, it's kind of it's kind of simple, right?
It is. It's like, I mean, I don't know of any value ever added to another human life when we are not nice to one another, right? It's just basic kindness and human, respect for each other. What a different world that would be. So,
We My business partner and I had a saying. We had a business in Afghanistan, and sometimes you get caught after curfew, or it could get a bit ropey. But we always said, if we're smiling, and it's highly unlikely that someone's going to shoot us. And and a smile and being nice is so disarming. But I think we just get, this is I think the beauty of a debrief, right? The debrief just breaks these cycles. You have negative perceptions of people. They invoke negative thoughts. The negative thoughts invoke negative decision making. The negative decision equals negative actions. The prophecy becomes fulfilled, and your perceptions become anchored in negativity around that person, that community, that religion. I think our debrief cycle brought logic back to all of our questions. And I might have thought I was the best pilot in the squadron, but today when I overstressed the jet, or had a hard landing, or my average scores on the bombing range were the same as a student pilot, I'm going to have those moments, and the hubris gets whipped away. I feel like in a business sense, when we have those moments, we ignore them.
you're absolutely right. Yeah, yeah. I think in our community we had a culture of integrity and accountability, where if you are flying a single seat airplane and you go out there in the airspace and you over G an airplane, you come back and report it, right? Just like, hey, this is what I did. It was wrong, but it needs an inspection, right? It would be so much easier just as, oh, no one's going to know about this. But we didn't do that because that was baked inside of us. It's not the right thing to do, right? And I think a lot of, for us, it is like, well, we don't want our comrade who's going to fly the airplane next to be in an airplane where we're not 100% sure of the integrity of the airplane anymore. But we self-reflected, and we're self-aware to say, this is the right thing to do. This happened. It was bad. Let me report it, and not um, just let it go. I think in business, we just let it, too many owners just let it go, right? They don't want to say that was a bad decision, or, oh, I really wasted that money, or I should have not hired that person, or I should have fired that person earlier, or like you mentioned earlier, I'm hanging on to this product that I love so much, although no one's buying it anymore. And just realize that, hey, that's not the right decision. And I think that's the value we provide, is that different perspective. Let me get you out of your head as a business owner and put you around some other people that are going to ask you, why are you doing this? Or what are you thinking? We try to stay away from why questions, but it's like, what are you thinking when you are doing this? Or what were you thinking? Or what did you learn from this?
You can do something about what, you can only think about why. Yeah. Uh, so, uh, uh, Along the way, Robert, were there moments where you thought that it just wasn't going to happen for you? Like, just like almost like it's too hard, not going to happen. And if you did, what did you do? What got you to keep going?
Um, yeah, I think that is where the power of your personal vision becomes so important, right? I do believe there are two situations in my life, Boo, where I felt like I manifested my future when I had no idea when I started how I was going to do it. Right. The first one was getting accepted into the Air Force Academy. I had no idea. Right. I mean, this was
Because that's tough. That's like There's a lot of. I was just talking about this to some guys literally yesterday who had went to a reunion, watched the Air Force Army game, and they were just saying how difficult. I mean, you got to get a congressional or nomination or nomination from a senator, right? Which the average 16, 17-year-old kid doesn't really have access to those people, yeah, or or mix in those circles. So getting into a service academy is a big deal.
It's a big deal. Yeah, I was at that Air Force Army game. It was a horrible game from an Air Force perspective, but anyway, but yeah, I mean that dream started for me when I was about 10 years old. I had come across that there was this institution that was very elite. That for those that were qualified, graduate from the institution and get to go fly jet airplanes. It's like I want to do that, right? And so, but I would spend every single night in my bedroom looking at the handbook, and like some of the materials from the Air Force Academy, just imagining myself be there. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to get there, right? But even though along the route it was like, oh, may I just screwed that up. I don't think I'm going to get there. But what helped me tremendously was I lived next door to a retired Air Force colonel, a retired Air Force pilot, who realized, okay, this kid is really serious about this, right? He's not just some punk, right? He's really committed and serious about doing this. So, like my commander getting in the U2, he's like, well, let's figure this out, right? I didn't know congressman, I didn't know senator, but I ended up getting a nomination from the senator of Texas, Lloyd Benson, because we figured it out, right? And even though I'd come up with obstacles and I would get rejection letters, from a congressman, or I would get, rejection letter from someone I had asked to do a letter of nomination who didn't know me at all, we just kept asking, right? And kept asking and kept asking and be like, well, let's try this. Let's try this. It would have been easy to take the first no and just like, it's not going to happen, right? But we were just persistent because my vision was so strong. I was going to do whatever I had to do in order to get there, right? And it was the same way to become a U2 pilot. I was going to do whatever I had to do, right? And I remember in my assignment prior to U2s, I was flying KC-10s out at Travis Air Force Base. So just trying to accumulate a lot of hours. And it looked like that my career field was so undermanned that the Air Force would not release me from flying KC-10s to go fly U2s, right?
That's like the breeding ground of airline pilots, right? And they're just constantly hemorrhaging pilots. Yeah.
They're constantly hemorrhaging pilots, and so I kept getting no, right, from my assignment managers. It's like, no, we can't release you. We can't release you. We can't release you. But I just kept asking the question and asking the question and asking the question. And finally had convinced the U2 community so bad that I wanted to be there that they were willing to go escalate the request to the appropriate level of general officer, be like, hey, can you get this guy released to come over here, right? Because we really need him in our community. And so it's just a matter of not taking no for an answer and trying to figure it out. It is too many people get the first no and they quit.
And the other thing is you don't need to be amazing. I was not amazing when I joined the Air Force to be a fighter pilot. I was not great at school. I was okay. I was not great at sport. I was okay. I certainly didn't feel like I was amazing at anything, but I didn't feel like I would ever not be a pilot. That was always there. And I think for people who are seeking something aspirational, there's loads of stories in the NFL, the Major League Baseball, NBA, of these incredible short or misfit personalities that punch well above their weight. And I think there's a big story in that. And this is probably one of the better stories I've had on the few that fundamentally, you use the word manifest, and a lot of people think that's a load of garbage. I think you do manifest. Like, I really do. I think you throw it out there. It's not enough to throw it out there. You throw it out there and commit to it. It will ultimately go from a manifestation into a reality.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I'm a huge fan of manifestation. We can go down a rabbit hole in quantum physics and a bunch of other things.
Yeah, let's go down it. Tell me about manifestation in the universe and quantum physics.
Yeah, I do think when we put out in the universe, what we want, and admit that we all know, from a physics standpoint, that we emit energies, in our human body. These can be measured. But when we put our vision out there with commitment, with passion, with belief, as long as the vision won't harm ourselves or anyone else, right? It needs to be a positive vision. When we put that out there and continue to communicate it, I do believe, right, that those messages find people that will help us or can help us achieve that vision, right? Because it's like, if you want something passionately really bad, but you never tell anyone else, it never allows anyone else an opportunity to help you get there, right? And so I think a lot of people have these bold visions, but they are afraid of communicating them, and they keep them inside of themselves. But instead of just saying, "This is what I'm going to do," right? I don't know how I'm going to do it yet, and that gets a lot of people stuck on the how. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but this is what I'm going to do. And when we start to communicate that, the how reveals itself, right? Because we will start being connected with thoughts or intuitions or ideas that will start to materialize into the how, right? I do believe that that is how the universe starts to deliver things to us, is it takes our vision and it starts to send us signals back on, we call it thought or gut or intuitions, but we start to realize the how, right? It starts to formulate in our mind of, oh, that's how I'm going to do it. Or we start to stumble across a podcast. Oh, that is a good idea on how I want to do it. Or we meet someone at a networking group or through a referral of, oh, this person has a piece of the puzzle that I need, right? It that they are going to help me get to my vision. And so when we start to boldly, passionately communicate what we want to accomplish, that's the only way I believe that we can collect and manifest the environment around us that's going to help bring it to fruition.
I agree with you. I don't know whether it's being able to fly, being able to see the world from a different perspective, or understand the concept of something bigger than just the rock. Uh, but equally, I think it's quite hard to communicate that to a lot of people as well. Like it's either misconstrued as spiritual gobbledygook, or it can't be that easy, and it's not easy. You can't just manifest and rub the genie bottle. And I think it's all those little nuances that you articulated so gracefully there that really, it's just, as you're talking, I'm like, that's my story. The person that just came out of the blue, that heard through a friend, through a friend, through a friend, that's what you wanted to do, and they it just connected with them, and they're like, that's my job, and this young person wants to do that. I mean, if that lands on my desk, I'm like, yeah, what can I do? Yeah, we're harnessed to help, right? And
We are harnessed to help. Yeah.
yeah, and yet more and more so now, because how hectic life is, we forget how enriching that is, and how much better it is for us to help. And then you get to an age, I'm sure you're no different now. And as I start to click over into 50, I've manifested. I've got it. And now it's time to be the receiver for those signals from other people, right?
Yeah. And when you're open minded to it, you receive those signals and you can start to help others. Yes.
That's awesome, man. That's such great insight. Gosh, I'm going to ask you this question, but I would presume the answer is nothing. If you went back to that, high school kid that was trying to get in the Air Force Academy, and there was one thing that you would tell yourself that may have made your journey faster or easier or more colorful, is there any lesson you've taken away from life that you? I mean, if you're like me, you probably manifested all that stuff as a kid. You didn't even realize it. Didn't even realize it was going on, right? But what would you go back and say to yourself? Or maybe what would you tell someone else's 14, 15-year-old son or daughter uh, to help them with their journey to become one of the few, to be who they're meant to be?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I didn't know it then, Boo, but I know it now. And I want young people now to know that you must have clarity of vision of what you want your life to look like, right? Regardless of where you're starting off and what advantages or disadvantages you currently have, right? You have to have a clear vision in your mind of what you want your life to look like. And if that is a positive vision and you embed it in your heart and you embed it in your mind and it just becomes a part of your soul, right? That is the first step. That is the first step to really having the life you want to have. And I think if I was going to go back and tell myself as a high school kid, is just have confidence, right? I think I lacked a lot of self confidence, even though I was working really hard. And at times I look at my hard work as maybe a way to compensate for my lack of self confidence. But I'd look back now and be like, Be confident, right? If you're doing the right things and you're surrounding yourself with the right people, which is really important, people that are really going to help you get there, and you believe wholeheartedly in what you're doing, not that it won't change in the future, but you go forth every single day trying to take step forward to accomplish your vision. That's how visions become reality. It's not going to happen on its own.
Preaching to the choir, Robert. 110%. Mate, that was just a brilliant conversation. Thank you for being generous, sharing insights into your unique world, but more importantly, how we can take some of that, use it in business. How natural it is. How coming from that environment, I feel like you that you almost have a sixth sense when a business comes in there and how to tighten up the team and learn and use this debriefing kind of mindset to grow. And I think you just closed on an absolute high. I think in a world where people just don't seem to feel that there's any hope, or, my job's not even going to exist in 2 years, and how do I fit into this whole puzzle, is that just pick something and lean into it. As fast as it feels the world moves, it doesn't move that fast in reality. So, hey man, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. If you want to reach out to Robert, just click below. All the links to his universe are down there. And if you're a small business owner and you're looking for some phenomenal guidance, I think based on that podcast, I'd be reaching out to Robert straight away. Remember, subscribe now. Click below. Leave a review. The more reviews we have, the better guests like Robert we have on the show. The show grows, the more people we have as listeners, so everybody wins. Once again, Robert, thanks so much for being on The Few. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Boo. You as well. Cheers.
Well, that wraps another episode of The Few. But before we go, I'd like to make a shout out to the team that make this podcast possible. The team at Afterburner. Real fighter pilots who travel the world helping organizations close the gap between where they are and where they want to be. It's the fighter pilot mindset, the methodologies, the ways of working, or what Afterburner call flawless execution. It's the techniques and trade secrets the Air Force uses to turn the dream of becoming a fighter pilot into a reality. Whether you have a leadership offsite, leadership retreat, maybe it's the annual event for your entire organization, or a sales kickoff. From 2 people to 2,000, Afterburner inspires people to believe that we can lift our performance to another level. So reach out and learn the secrets fighter pilots use to win 98% of the time.